The venture capital industry is an exciting industry. Truly, it's one of the most exciting industries that I can imagine. And the reason why it's so exciting is because we sit on the cusp of new technologies being developed every single day that are improving lives across the world. We understand this at the Kauffman Fellows. We also understand at Kauffman Fellows that it is basically in the investor's realm, it is the top 1 to 4% of these investment opportunities that give the outsized returns in the business, the 80% plus of aggregate returns in the business. So while we love to fuel innovation, while we love to fund great entrepreneurs doing great things, we recognize that our success is pegged to a very small percentage of deals. And so we know that in our job, what we have to do is we have to understand how we can do one of two things. Number one, we focus on trying to get into the best deals in the business, those top 1 to 4%. We focus on how do we get access to those. Or number two, we help the companies that we have invested in make sure that we help them grow to get into that top 1 to 4% of deals. Just to be clear, we want to invest in these best outcomes, not just because of financial ROI, but really because of impact ROI. I mean, in venture investors, we're here to fuel the innovation that improves lives across the world. So we really want to see the impact ROI that comes from the investments that we make. When we do this, we recognize it's very hard to get into this top 1 to 4%. There's no just kind of black box. Oftentimes I'll hear candidates say, hey, I want to join the Kauffman Fellows program because I want you to open the black box of secrets that describes the VC industry. And I often tell them, look, I hate to break it to you, but there is no black box. There's no secrets here that I can share with you. But there is a framework that we've developed that we believe, if followed, greatly enhances your chances of getting into that top 1 to 4% of deals. And we've developed this framework by watching the best investors in the world do what they do. The Kauffman Fellows framework consists of 4 pillars. The first pillar is that we believe the best investors in the world have radical self-belief and a willingness to bet on themselves. So they invest because of conviction, not because of consensus, or because of fear of missing out, FOMO, or because they read something on somebody's blog that said, hey, this is the next thing that I need to invest in. They're investing because of deeply held passions, educational background, experience levels, and again, that conviction. We use this methodology in the program called the 4 zones of human operation, where if you imagine a pyramid similar to any other pyramid you would see, the top level of that pyramid is your zone of genius, the next is your zone of excellence, the next is your zone of competence, and the next is your zone of incompetence. Now, obviously, we don't want to spend any of our time in our zone of incompetence, but way too many of us spend too much time in our zone of competence or our zone of excellence, and not nearly enough time in our zone of genius. Frankly, many of us don't even know what our zone of genius is. So we spend a lot of time helping the fellows identify what makes you truly unique, truly special. What is your zone of genius, and how do you apply that to helping the entrepreneurs that you've invested in? So that's number one. The second piece of the framework is that we believe the best investors in the world have a novel investment thesis. And this investment thesis is something that maps back to their zone of genius, maps back to their convictions. This is key. We want them spending time. We believe that they're going to be the most successful if they're spending time on the things that they're most passionate about and they have the most conviction about. Too often we see investors chase deals simply because they heard that somebody else is in the deal, or because they hear that they read something about it and now it's a hot topic, and so now they need to have exposure to this different kind of sector or company. We believe the best investors in the world are disciplined and know exactly what they're looking for, and they invest in that area. And of course, as technology changes, as things happen, you can change and iterate on this thesis, but you have to have a thesis that maps back to your strengths. So that's number two. The third piece of the framework is that we believe the best investors in the world have a strong personal brand. Now, we define personal brand much differently than the world does. The world would say that your personal brand is how many Twitter followers you have, or what your social media footprint is. We define personal brand as the promise of the experience. What is the promise of the experience that an entrepreneur has when interacting with you as an investor? One example is, if I'm an entrepreneur and I email you as an investor, do I get a response in 24 hours or 24 days? And is that response one that's truly inquisitive and wants to learn more about me? One of the things that we tell the fellows is that in any given year, you're going to have 1,000 interactions. And 3 of those interactions are going to change your life. But you have no idea which 3. So how are you going to show up to every single interaction you have, every single coffee meeting, every single board meeting with one of your portfolio companies, every single pitch meeting where you meet a new entrepreneur and they come in to tell you about their company? How do you stay engaged? How do you stay curious? That is your personal brand. It's the promise of the experience. The fourth piece of the Kauffman Fellows framework is that we recognize that after 22 years in this business, we see that it's not just the technical dynamics of the business that measure success, but much more the human dynamics that measure success in this business. That's why we call our program a behavioral fitness program. We really focus deeply on the core character traits, the core behavioral traits that we think make investors great. So it's things like, how do you communicate? How do you receive communication? How does your communication style impact those around you? How do you employ active listening skills when engaging in a conversation? These things are really critical. We've found that, and we see that there is this power dynamic that exists, or this perception of a power dynamic that exists between entrepreneurs and investors. And we see this because as investors, we walk into a room and we have a checkbook in our pocket, and we sit on their boards, on these entrepreneurs' boards. And frankly, we have the fiduciary responsibility to sometimes hire and fire key members of their team. So because of this, there exists this perception of a power dynamic where entrepreneurs really hang on the words that we say, and they have a lot of weight, the things that we say and the things that we do. We've got to be good stewards of that relationship as investors. And so we focus very deeply on how do we treat this relationship between investor and entrepreneur, and this perception of this power dynamic. It's so key in the way that we show up with the way that we act, the things that we say, our nonverbal and our verbal communication. And if we show up to a board meeting and we fold our arms, or we do something that communicates grumpiness or closed-mindedness, that can have a real big impact on not just that meeting, but truly, many, many other things pertaining to that entrepreneur's day and to the business as a whole. So we focus very much on the behavioral aspects of the business because we believe these really point towards success. So the four pieces of the framework, we believe that most investors spend more than 50% of their time not focused on these areas. And so we take Kauffman Fellows through a 2-year journey where we're going to focus very deeply on these 4 pieces of the framework and weave them into all the different discussions that we have. And then we do this in a Kauffman confidential setting where it's a safe zone where everybody is there to learn and to grow and to give and take from the different classmates that are with them. It's a magical experience.